Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I am Harry.
And I am Kimmy. Today we are exploring a truly fascinating and somewhat overlooked piece of American Revolutionary War history, the Maryland and Virginia Rifle Regiment.
Also commonly known as Rawlings Regiment in period documents. Organized in June 1776, they were a highly specialized light infantry unit of the Continental Army.
What really makes them stand out is their weaponry and battlefield tactics. While the predominant forces of the Revolutionary War used muskets and fought in very structured, short-ranged, ordered linear formations, this regiment was exclusively equipped with rifles.
Exactly. That gave them a crucial long-range marksmanship capability. They were typically deployed alongside the line infantry as forward skirmishers and flanking elements. They also took on routine scouting, escort, and outpost duties. Because their battle formation was not nearly as rigid as the line infantry, they could respond with far more adaptability to rapidly changing battle conditions.
The regiment initially consisted of 9 companies, 4 from Maryland and 5 from Virginia. Because of this unique two-state composition, they could not be managed by a single state government.
Right. So they were designated as an extra-continental regiment. This meant they were directly accountable to national authority, namely Congress and the Continental Army, rather than being part of a state line organization.
The regiment's field officers were drawn from 3 earlier independent Continental Rifle Companies formed in 1775 based on their seniority. Hugh Stevenson from Virginia became the colonel, with Moses Rawlings as lieutenant colonel and Otto Holland Williams as major.
They recruited heavily throughout the summer and fall of 1776 in places like Frederick and Harford counties in Maryland and a host of counties in Virginia, including Berkeley, Loudoun, Fauquier, Prince William, and Culpeper. The enlisted men committed for 3 years or the duration of the war.
But things took a very grim turn rather quickly. By early November 1776, the majority of the regiment's men had joined George Washington's main army during the battle for New York City.
Yes, the New York and New Jersey campaign. On November 16th, most of the regiment was stationed at Fort Washington on Manhattan Island. They found themselves defending the northern end of the American position against a massive force of several thousand Hessian troops. It was a brutal, day-long fight. After holding off the Hessians and inflicting many casualties, the heavily outnumbered riflemen were eventually driven from their outer works into the fort. Ultimately, they and the rest of the American garrison had to surrender to the combined British and German attack force.
Colonel Stevenson had tragically died of illness earlier that August or September, so Lieutenant Colonel Rawlings was actually commanding the regiment during the battle when they were captured. For a long time, both modern and contemporaneous accounts conveyed the impression that this disaster marked the absolute end of the regiment as a combat entity.
However, that was not the end at all. A lesser-known fact is that about 140 officers and enlisted men, roughly 1/3 of the unit's total complement, were not present at the battle because they were still completing their organization and recruiting back home.
Plus, a few enlisted men who amazingly managed to escape their captors during the short, chaotic period after the battle augmented this surviving force. On December 1st, Washington provisionally grouped these remaining men into 2 composite rifle companies.
The Marylanders were placed under Captain Alexander Lawson Smith and the Virginians under Captain Gabriel Long. These 2 composite companies stayed highly active, serving in the main army's retreat across New Jersey and fighting in the battles of Trenton and Princeton in Brigadier General Hugh Mercer's brigade.
They also played a big role in the early 1777 skirmishing in northern New Jersey, a period termed the Forage War. While in winter quarters at Morristown, they conducted patrols primarily to keep the enemy's aggressive foraging activities in check. They were so effective that Washington used them to bolster Colonel Daniel Morgan's new 11th Virginia Regiment.
That connection to Daniel Morgan is vital. In June 1777, Washington created Morgan's Provisional Rifle Corps. 35 men from the Maryland and Virginia Rifle Regiment were selected for this elite, regiment-sized force.
Those men served in Captain Gabriel Long's Provisional Rifle Company. This elite corps went on to play a major, famous role in the battles of Saratoga.
Meanwhile, the rest of the regiment's men who were not chosen for the elite corps stayed with the main army. The Marylanders fought in major engagements like Brandywine, Germantown, and Monmouth. It is absolutely amazing how widely dispersed this single unit's impact was. Fast forward to early 1778, Lieutenant Colonel Moses Rawlings was finally exchanged from British captivity. He took command of the prisoner of war camp at Fort Frederick, Maryland, and desperately tried to rebuild his regiment. Major Otho Holland Williams was also exchanged around this time, but was promoted to colonel of the 6th Maryland Regiment.
Recruiting was incredibly difficult at that late stage of the war, even with Congress explicitly allowing them to recruit outside Maryland and offering state-specific bonuses. Rawlings only managed to gather about 30 to 40 new enlistees by the end of 1778.
Recognizing the struggle, Washington authorized a major reorganization in early 1779. The regiment was restructured into 3 companies and reassigned to Fort Pitt in present-day western Pennsylvania, which was the headquarters of the Continental Army's Western Department.
Their new mission was critical, defending frontier settlements from devastating raids by British allied Indian tribes. They complemented the existing garrison at Fort Pitt, joining forces with the 8th Pennsylvania and 9th Virginia regiments.
Under Western Department Commander Colonel Daniel Brodhead, they participated in a major 1779 campaign up the Allegheny River, destroying the villages and crops of hostile Mingo and Munsee Indians. This was actually part of Washington's wide-ranging coordinated offensive that included the famous Sullivan Campaign in New York.
From mid-1779 until late 1780, the regiment was deployed in detachments to support line infantry at several frontier outposts, including Fort Lawrence, Fort McIntosh, and Fort Henry.
Unfortunately, maintaining the regiment's troop strength proved utterly impossible. By mid-1779, the 3-year enlistments of the original 1776 recruits had expired, instantly cutting their strength in half. Rawlings resigned his command in frustration that June.
Here is a fascinating, if not completely bizarre, detail from their final years. By 1780, the new commander, Captain Thomas Beale, was under such intense pressure to find recruits that he actually approved the enlistment of a British prisoner of war.
Talk about bending the rules to the breaking point. Beale realized his lapse in judgment and tried to discharge the man, but he had already given the recruiter bounty and service clothes. Beale was court-martialed for defrauding the United States and dismissed from the service in October 1780.
Captain Adamson Tannehill took over command, but the writing was permanently on the wall. On January 1, 1781, as part of a comprehensive reorganization of the Continental Army, the regiment was officially disbanded. At that point, the much-diminished unit comprised only 2 officers and 50 enlisted men.
Those remaining enlisted men were eventually transferred to the Maryland line, though relocation from their remote post at Fort Pitt took until November of that year. Despite its fragmented structure and tragic losses, it stands proudly as the longest-serving Continental Army rifle unit of the war.
And beautifully, its lineage is not lost to history. The Virginia element's legacy is actually carried on today by the 201st Field Artillery Regiment of the United States. What an incredible journey for one regiment. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's deep dive, everyone. We hope you enjoyed learning about this unique piece of American history.
This episode is based on the Wikipedia article Maryland and Virginia Rifle Regiment, which is available under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license. This podcast was crafted using artificial intelligence.